right, welcome to It's Alive, where we host a space every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 noon Eastern, to talk about developments in the world of UBI and meet with the people who are making it all happen. I'm Scott Santons. I've been researching, writing, and advocating for the concept of UBI for the last 10 years. For those new to the concept, UBI stands for Unconditional or Universal Basic Income. It's the idea that every individual in society can and should be guaranteed a periodic cash payment without means test or work requirement in order to make their way in the world upon a firm foundation. I recently started the Income to Support All Foundation, or ITSA Foundation, which provides support to projects that aim to make UBI a reality through research, storytelling, and implementation. You can learn more at itsafoundation.org. Today we have Gisele Huff as our special guest. She's the founder of the Gerald Huff Fund for Humanity and a personal friend of mine. It's great to have her with us today. And as always, I'm joined by my co-hosts, Conrad Shaw and Josh Worth, co-founders of Comingle. They're on here as the UBI guy and Comingler 1. Comingle is one of the first projects we're promoting at the ITSA Foundation. Josh, can you tell people what Comingle is all about?
Yes, Comingle is a money-sharing app that allows people to pool a percentage of their income into a community fund that gets divided up evenly and distributed as a weekly basic income. The result is that members give money when they have it and get money when they need it so that no member ever goes a week without income. You can learn more all about it at comingle.us.
Or at the crowdfund. The crowdfund's still up and running. We had a successful crowdfund a couple of months ago on Indiegogo, and because it was successful, they let us keep it open in demand. I've added a comment in the comment thread below that includes it and a bunch of other ways to get involved or stay involved if you're interested in what we're doing here.
All right. So before we bring in Gisele, I like to start off with a little bit of news to kind of prime the pump of the discussion. And just also as a note for listeners who are already here, the first hour will just be with our guest, and then we'll bring in listeners as speakers with questions and comments in the second hour. So, yeah, to start things off today, even though we mentioned this and discussed a little bit last week, I want to bring it up again because it's big news. So this is it's about the first results from the big basic income experiment in Kenya. And so for people who haven't heard of this yet, this is a 12-year experiment. It was launched 7 years ago. It's got 5 years left in it. And it's providing 5,000 people universally, a basic income to everyone in the village in 44 different villages. And this is also being compared to a couple other groups where there was a group that just got the same amount of basic income for 2 years, and also a group that got lump sum payments equivalent to the 2 years worth of basic income. And so they got that income all at once. And that was also, these are fully universal. So like you would find a village and let's say the village has 500 people in it or something. And so then, everyone in the village would get a lump sum payment. And these results are looking at those first 2 years across all these three different conditions. And I read the report myself, went through it somewhat recently, and it was just really interesting to see some of these different findings that they wrote up about. And so I'll just cover some of them right now in summary for everyone. And so first of all, work did not decrease, but shifted significantly from wage labor to self-employment. And in fact, overall work actually increased, but that increase was not enough to be considered a significant finding. But also, I just think that's very interesting that, so often we see this, not only people not work less, but can actually work more. And also interesting that there was so much entrepreneurship that happened that the pool of available wage labor shrunk. So then the wages went up to attract more workers, just because so many people start their own businesses. Really interesting. And then also, besides the fact that the wages went up, you would think that also would mean more expensive goods and services, but actually that did not happen. There was no inflation, and this was despite a 15% increase on average in the amount of money in these villages. This is like external money expanding the money supply, and wages went up, and yet the prices of goods and services did not. Why? Well, because there was just such, again, like massive entrepreneurship. Uh, Profits actually went up over 52%, despite the higher cost of labor. And that's because they had so many more customers as well. So this is like it really shows that it's just such a big difference to make sure that businesses have capital and that they also have customers too. And the number of non-agricultural businesses increased by 25%. So that can give you an idea of just how many more businesses started up. People reported seeing fewer of their neighbors drinking daily and were less likely to perceive drinking as a problem. So that's like the way that they even looked at that is you could see it wasn't like asking people if they like drank less. This was actually an observation from other people where like prior to the basic income they felt that this was more of a problem, and then after basic income people felt it was less of a problem. Households borrowed less money. That's of course something we see a lot. That makes perfect sense that households with a basic income will need to take on less debt. And rates of depression significantly decreased. That was a significant finding. And happiness increased. So it was interesting the way they even kind of described that, where participants described being 1/5 of one step closer to their possible best life on a 0 to 10 step scale. Like that's how they measure the happiness. Kind of like, if like taking 10 steps is how to get to your like perfect life, how much closer are you to that like perfect best possible life? And on average, people said 1/5 of one step closer. So I just think that's really interesting to consider that not only does mental health improve, depression and anxiety go down, but yeah, happiness goes up. So yeah, I recommend that people look into that. There's been multiple other articles written about these findings, and it's just really exciting to see these first findings from this. Okay, so next up, I just want to mention that in Scotland, the Green Party there has reiterated that in the case of Scottish independence, that they would push for basic income, and this just has long seemed kind of a possible likelihood of Scottish independence. So that discussion is happening again. In in their discussions of should we stick around in the UK when we kind of had our hands tied with things that we can do, whereas if we go for independence, then this and other things are things that we can now do. And the other thing I just want to mention is that Wales is set to end its current experiment, which is for care leavers. And so this is like kids in foster care who have grown up in the system, and they're doing this multi-year pilot that has always planned to be a pilot that ends in 2025. And so as of right now, they're saying that it's just going to end as planned in 2025. And so I want to make sure and mention that because it's just something very similar happened with the Finland pilot. And to this day, people think that Finland canceled its pilot or something, that somehow failed, that the what they found was somehow, was somehow failure. But it's not the case at all. It was a 2-year pilot there in Finland that ended as scheduled. And it's the same here in Wales, where this is a multi-year pilot that is scheduled to end in 2025, and that's what just they're planning on doing, is ending in 2025 as scheduled. And then the report will be out however many years after that. So you wouldn't really expect them to necessarily go forward without the final report, anyways. But I want to make sure that gets out there because I do expect same kind of misinformation that we saw with the Finland news to surround this news out in Wales too with their pilot.
Well, the headline sort of writes itself. Wales fails.
Yeah, I suppose we can expect something like that from somewhere.
Yeah.
All right, and so with that being just the kind of recent news headlines, Gisele, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So yeah, do you want to just give listeners just a quick summary of the Gerald Huff Fund for Humanity and the inspiration for it, what and what you've been doing with that? I mean, there's just so much to talk about, even with your life and everything. But I think that's a good place to start.
Okay, so the Gerald Huff Fund for Humanity, which I started in 2019, is named after my late son, who tragically died in November of 2018 of pancreatic cancer, 7 weeks after he was diagnosed. Gerald was the principal software engineer at Tesla for the Model 3. So he was in charge of developing the connection between the cloud and the car, the team that did that. And he was a techie from way back. He was very concerned about technological unemployment. He wrote a techno thriller, which took him 5 years to do because Elon Musk is a hard taskmaster. And the book was a justification for implementing UBI as a transitional measure to deal with the devastation of technological unemployment. So after he died, I decided to start the fund to continue the work that he would have done had he still been with us. And the mission of the fund is really to inform and help with the implementation of UBI, because it's based on a mind shift. And the mind shift is very difficult to accomplish because we have been in the thaw of these ideas since Adam Smith and John Locke wrote. The one Adam Smith talking about the circulation of money being what made the wealth of nations, and John Locke saying that the labor theory of income, of property, was based on the labor you put into it, but you had to leave good enough for others. And those two ideas, which were really the basis for capitalism, among others, have been forgotten or not emphasized. And of course, the basis for our species' survival has always been collaboration, but it has morphed into competition. So we're going completely against what we should be doing. And the universal basic income is an expression of that. What we should do.
Yeah, it is amazing how like people will distort, the writings of Adam Smith as, like, oh, that's how capitalism started, and he was like the ultimate capitalist and everything. And, at no point did he believe on this like free for all where like there's there's nothing in any kind of regulation, any kind of social welfare system at all, and it's just like this rampant Mad Max free for all or something. Like that's not what capitalism was even described by Adam Smith. And yeah, we've definitely gotten away from these kinds of details.
Well, it's
Yeah, the biggest changes in history for humankind are all derived in collaboration, and somehow we've taken out of that we need to fight each other tooth and nail over resources, over acclaim and fame, and we've forgotten about
yeah,
teamwork. We've forgotten about lifting each other up.
absolutely. And the other side of that is that people live in a world which is the world the scarcity, the age of scarcity, live in a world where everything is a zero sum game, and that is not correct. And it's also when you think about some of the things that people say about funding UBI. Lately, I've been reminded of, although it wasn't really clear to me for a long. I mean, what wasn't something I was thinking about. But when you think about land value taxes, this is exactly
Mm-hmm.
what John Locke had in mind. How can you have 60,000 acres that you own in Texas where nothing happens? What is the rationale for that? There is no rationale for that.
Yeah.
So, this is something. So, if you're not using what is essentially something that belongs to everyone, then you have to pay for it. And if you think about, I mean, I live in San Francisco, and if you drive in Oakland on one of the main, arteries, Shattuck, and you drive for miles, and on either side of the 6-lane boulevard, you have 1-story buildings that are boarded up, and
Mm-hmm.
you can't afford to live in Oakland. It's too expensive. So this is crazy. I mean, it's literally if an alien were to come down and look at the institutions that we still live under, he would say these people are completely nuts. There's no rationale for these things. And that's what we have
Yeah.
to address, in my view, in order to get UBI implemented. People have to realize, they have to have their eyes opened to how we got pulled into this in the first place, and how it continues way beyond the time when it's viable anymore.
I mean, it reminds me of people trying to go clear from some cult or Scientology or something like that, where we're so raised in it that it's almost like the political argument is at a severe disadvantage, because people are trained to believe in something like as in faith, as a religion, where the only real way to open people up to something that they've never considered anything outside of is to show them. I feel like, and that I feel like that's part of why we're doing the stuff we're doing with Comingle, just to sort of build a model people can witness. But this comes after 7 years for me, 10 or 11 years for Scott, and a lot of years for Gerald, just making the arguments as rationally as possible, but we have to acknowledge that our society is not sane. So a rational argument might not be the way to do it to really get through.
Absolutely. It's got to be um, a cultural argument. It has to be, I mean, the reason Reagan was so successful was because he spoke to the heart. This is, we are ruled probably 90% by our feelings and 10% by our reason. And so we have to address that part of the population at large in order to convince them that this is something that not only will benefit others but will benefit them as well. I mean, we are now in a situation where um, parents are not looking at their children and thinking that they will be more successful than they are. In fact, Andy Stern, who is a big proponent of UBI, calls it parental basic income, because in the upper middle class or the middle class, it's very much the case that parents help kids with rent.
Mm-hmm.
If they want to, not be in the basement, they can't afford the rentals in the places where they work. So those are the things that we have to bring to the fore, but it's extremely difficult. Look at all of the pilots that have, been going on in America, and how many reports we've heard, like what Scott was saying earlier. For one thing, it's very subtle. There are no, changes in the lives of the people that are dramatic. It's all a very subtle thing, a very small number of the statistics are not really dramatic. And it doesn't seem to have any impact. So there has to be something else, and I'm part of what the Fund for Humanity is doing is trying to find that something else.
Right. Like, I mean, one of the projects of Fund for Humanity is actually basic income today, and I think listeners should be familiar with that option. You can go to basicincometoday.com and follow at UBI Today on Twitter. And this is just it's a daily news source. You can subscribe and just kind of be be in the loop constantly about what's going on with just a couple pieces of news per day. And I think that is it's very valuable to at least know what's going on, and with that constant kind of drip of learning what's going on, then I think that people become more able to think a little bit differently about it, and more able to talk with others about it just from being more informed of everything that's going on. As an example, I know Dean Phillips has been asked multiple times about basic income. It's nice to see any candidate for president be asked about their stance on basic income these days. It's certainly a newer thing than it was years ago. So that's one advancement. But then what was frustrating to me is that to see that Dean Phillips will say something like, "Oh, I support a pilot project at the let's really look at this." And it's frustrating for me because how do you have a stance like that, and then there's hundreds of pilots. There's almost 200 pilots already in the U.S. that's currently either done or in the process of being done. Going about the research takes time, but we're going to see a flood of results from all these different pilots across cities, across the U.S. And I can just imagine being like a presidential candidate in next year, and you're talking about how there should be a pilot when people are just reading news after news after news about a successful pilot. Like there's at some point the voters are going to be like, what are you talking about? Like we all know, like we've seen this. We
Or
know that it works. Let's do it.
or the people aren't reading news after news after news because we see them a lot in our circles, but are they really spreading that far out? Like I see these like 50, 100 pilots or whatever, and in the groups I'm in and the listservs, we get a report at the end that was like, look at this great report, and everyone congratulates each other. But I don't know anybody else outside of our circles who is seeing all these reports.
Right. It's part of the challenge.
Maybe it gets a week of local news in the area where the pilot was done, but the all these pilots in general are lacking a vision in terms of how do you translate that to something bigger, something that pushes more towards policy. And long before these, Mayors for a Guaranteed Income pilots, or early on in them, we were running ours. I was doing both a documentary and a pilot, and people would find out about that, and they had sort of ambitions to do their own sort of similar thing and would reach out to me for advice. And my advice was, well, it always started with a question. It's like, why? Why you? What are you doing differently? You could sense someone's coming for validation because they want to do a project, and it makes it this personal thing where the thinking, if we're going to take our movement somewhere, has got to be, what are we actually pushing for on a bigger level rather than these personal projects or these local projects, but what's a more holistic vision for how we actually move the needle? We don't need 1 or 20 or 50 more of the same pilots that have all the same data coming out of every single one. It's not going to just catch fire all of a sudden. We need something different. We need to be more creative, and people in general don't really, most people don't spend a lot of time envisioning or imagining a different world. Most people believe what they see. And in terms of showing people something that they can see and believe in, it has to go further than these temporary little glimpses at, something that hints at a basic income in some locale somewhere.
Yeah, and numbers and data, like as Gisele said, that we're so much feeling driven, and how do you get people to feel those feelings, that either about the data or that go beyond the data? And yeah, it's a big challenge.
Yeah, and so there's two ways that this can happen at the macro level. You have to either, not either, but both, mobilize people into a movement. There was a hint of that, the beginning of that, when Andrew Yang was running, but all of the Yang people were really supporting him and not the concept. The concept was one of several in his campaign, but there was a hope that all of those millions of people who actually, supported his campaign would continue to be proponents of universal basic income and become a movement. Because I think the statistic is that in order to make change happen in a society, you need 3.3% of the people to, concentrate on it. Well, we definitely had that with him. The other part of it is, getting out there in the world of media. When I started the fund, Gerald had a high school friend who has become the vice president of a worldwide advertising PR agency, and he gave the fund the ability to put together a video, a 30-second video, pro bono, which was done by very professional people, and it was shown at the beginning of 2020, if I remember correctly, or maybe 2021, I don't recall. And that gathered in a 6-week period 7 million views. And then it stopped because, it costs money to do that, and there's no one who's doing that. I mean, the fund can't afford to pay for it. It was a pro bono contribution. But those are the kind of things that we have to continue to mobilize people, find a way to mobilize people. That is the point of looking for a narrative that will persuade not the people who care about the underserved, because most of the programs, the pilots that have been started, target specific, groups of people that are already part of the welfare state. And that is, we know how we were barely out of the meme of the welfare queen. I mean, I don't know that it's been completely erased since.
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah.
So
it's still there.
I think part of moving millions of people too is in terms of when they say that 3% number, you compare, like, there's always these polls like 50% of people support an idea, but supporting is very different than being out in the street advocating and working and fighting for something. And that's where that 3 to 5% number comes in. But to get millions of people to actually get off their ass and commit their time in this busy and hard to survive already world, people need to be able to see the end line. People need to be able to see where it's going and how it's going. They need something to rally around, or an idea, or a feeling that something is coming together. That's what needs to be shown. So while Andrew Yang was running, there was that central figure, there was that central campaign. And I actually disagree that everyone was just supporting him. I think the biggest strength of his campaign came from the idea of basic income and rallied a lot of people around it. And I see a lot of people that are very disillusioned with, him, for example, now, because he's kind of moved on to different ideas, different priorities, or like the different order of operations sort of thing. And the people who would support UBI, did support UBI, don't see an easy path to be effective in fighting for it. And so they go back to their business and their regular lives. And one of the things I see is the responsibility of a movement is to very effectively organize, which involves giving people easy plug-in ways to be part of something. You can't have, a million people going around inventing their own, versions of the movement and all doing it at once. It's got to be a bunch of people together working on a thing. So we have to have that thing for them. And so that's kind of what we've been trying to build. But it's very hard to make a thing that has enough inherent merit and has enough proof in the pudding and everything to bring along all those people. It takes a long time to develop something like that.
Well, we have concentrated with good reason on the people that are left behind, but who we have to convince is the middle class. And I don't,
Yeah.
So in order to do that, partly I think it's a good idea to have the pilots and prove that it improves people's lives and that this is money well spent and so on, but it doesn't touch them. So, and we haven't really, as far as I know, except I think Liam is really concentrating on the more of the legislative thing, but he's trying to reach Republicans. So that's the one attempt that I know of that is really going across the aisle politically, but socially, in terms of our society. We have to convince the people in the middle. You never convince the extremes on either side. On one side, they think it's the government is supporting the people. That's very dangerous. On the other side, reparations, and we have to, deal with the people who have been marginalized forever and make them whole. Those two things are probably 20% on either side, and in the middle that counts. And we haven't developed a strategy to address the middle.
We've actually done the opposite in the last few years, leaned into the identity politics side of things. And because of it, a lot of people tuned out. One of the strengths of the messaging of the Yang campaign was it was unapologetically universal. It was about everyone. It was a big tent policy. And what's happened since the pandemic and the different pilots is it's become very focused on specific demographics and specific groups and moralistic arguments towards what's right. And it's sort of this paternalistic, we need to help the lesser people sort of thing, which, it might come from good intentions, but it ends up being the same sort of intentions that lead to the perverse welfare system as we have it. We have to help the people who can't help themselves, rather than an acknowledgement that everyone has ability or inherent value to help themselves if just given access. And so the best thing we can do is to get access to people.
Yeah, I mean, the universality is such an important component. The big challenge is if the middle class feels that, like, oh, great, basic income, that just means that my taxes are going to go up and I'm not going to get anything out of it. You're just going to tax me even more, and I'm barely getting by right now. And as that can even be a misunderstanding of just basic income. It's helpful to be able just to say universal basic income. And again, when Yang was able to really lean into that, say that, and it's just harder to think that, oh, I'm not going to benefit. It's still possible. Use the UBI calculator, plug in your household income, figure out after taxes if your income's going to go up or down. But for the most part, it's those at the very top whose taxes are going to go up, and those in the, say, bottom 60 to 90% potentially are going to see their incomes go up. And it feels like it should be simple to help push that message for people to know that it's universal and that they'll benefit. And yet at the same time, that's still challenging. It's still tough to get people to recognize that as a member of the middle class, that they will be better off with a basic income because they'll actually be included.
Well, yes, I agree. It's very difficult, but it has to be done. So, but it's not the mindset of the movement. The mindset of the movement is geared towards the people, the identity part of this. And that's what needs to be addressed. We need to find out, we have to work on how we get this message out to the people in the middle. Just like I said before, I agree, it's very difficult, but it has been done. I mean, you look at the women's suffrage movement, you look at of course, it took a long, long time, 70 years. Or you look at the gay marriage movement, that took 50 years. It can be done, but there has to be an organized attempt, and I'm not seeing the beginnings of that.
Well, I think the movement has sort of lost its way by leaning into this more partisan, approach, and I think the real path to change is, there's a couple of different ways to have this large growth, and one is by being nonpartisan political, and one is by being non-political, and some combination of those. That either form of like a big tent ideology, which is not leaning into us versus them language, and these are the bad guys and these are the good guys, is the way forward. It's just that's not anyone's instinct right now. Or most people's instinct is is sort of trained against that at this point, and that's part of why we started the ITSA Foundation. Is that all the foundations, even the ones working in UBI, have even stopped saying words like universal at all. They're like, let's say guaranteed income, so we don't have to say universal income, because we don't want to put ourselves in a position where we're not, showing that we care more about, the specific groups we're supposed to care more about. And it just kind of shackled the strength of the idea and the movement. And the way we get it back is by building infrastructure and by building narratives that are specifically big tent in inviting narratives and projects that anyone can be involved in. Like when we did our docuseries, it's very important to me that it not be some sort of poverty porn, that it not be like playing on all the right strings that we hear in our bubbles. Like we wanted a guy who's a doomsday prepper, sort of right-wing leaning person, and someone who was homeless in New York, someone who's an indigenous person, someone trans, someone middle class. It has to be directly shown and embraced that this is for everyone policy, or else what are we doing here? We're just saying the right words so we can have said the right words and been, on the correct side of history without ever accomplishing anything. Then what's the point?
Well, one hopeful note here is the advent of AI, because AI is going to affect the middle class. It's going to be white-collar workers that are going to be most affected by it. So,
yeah, let's go into, actually, do you want to tell listeners more about Crisis 2038, the book that Gerald wrote, kind of, I don't know, just a little bit of a Cliff's Notes as what actually was portrayed in the book and the role that basic income played? Because I just think it's even just been really interesting to see how things have gone, since he published it, and this the acceleration of AI and seeing people's responses both to AI and I would say the lack of basic income, and leading up to this crisis point that he saw.
Yeah. So as I said before, Gerald was a real techie, and he. When he wrote Crisis, he started writing Crisis 2038 in 2013. And he foresaw, supercomputers, and he foresaw the use of bots and so on. That's what his novel is based on. And what it involves is a band of Luddites, if you will, who also are quite well versed in the world of technology, and who are trying to destroy what technology is taking the world. And so it's a battle between technology as a positive force and technology as a negative force, which actually turns into a battle. There's there's a lot of destruction that happens, and in the course of all that, he has several chapters that deal with 6 senators, 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans, who get together to try to come to terms with what's going on, and he describes how their minds are changed. And how they come to universal basic income as a solution. But what happens in the book is that there is there's a real it's very clear what could happen if we do not recognize that we need a transition between the world as it is now and the world how it's going to be 5 years from now. That there will be blood on the street, And so when he describes how UBI will give people hope and will keep them from joining the movement to destroy the thing that has the potential of making the human experience orders of magnitude better. So the idea that it shouldn't be the GDP, but you should be measuring happiness, and which is what Bhutan does, little Bhutan. But the the struggle between the two forces is spelled out in a way. I mean, as he was prescient about the development of the technology, I think he was also prescient on what can happen when those two
Mm-hmm.
forces meet.
Yeah, it's been fascinating watching the responses across the political spectrum to ChatGPT. Its launched last November, and just where we've come even in the past year to see like you know artists really come out against the use of AI. And instead of say like demanding that because this was trained on their work and demanding a UBI is like recognition of that and a piece of that. The response has been just no, don't use it, and encouraging other people not to use it. So you're seeing this kind of like populist reaction to AI being trying to encourage people to basically boycott AI, like do not use this. Um, and even some of them are even saying, do not use this because we don't have the UBI. Like and only when we have a UBI, then you can use this. And yeah, it's a real catch-22 to see that AI is going to apply pressure, like I said, to the middle class in a way that they have not seen previously. With the impact on white collar workers instead of traditional blue collar workers. And what will be the result of this? You're going to see people getting more and more stressed out, um, worried about how they're going to make an income, worried about their kids being able to make an income, um, and yeah, you're gonna see some violent actions. I think at some point. And, right now it's just kind of don't use it, but like in Gerald's book, you have like these kind of terroristic actions with blowing up self-driving trucks and drones and stuff like that. And the kind of this what's undergirding all of this is this complete lack of economic security, this rampant rising of fear, and that's a pressure cooker. All sorts of things can happen when you've got that pressure cooker boiling.
It's just a bastard with the art case. It's a bastardization of what art is supposed to be about, because we're assuming that it is and has to always be that the purpose of art is to make money, whereas the purpose of art is to express oneself and to develop a craft and to find something deeper and to share with other human beings. And we've boiled it down to the place where it's all about making money, as opposed, and we're fighting against. We're fighting to protect that paradigm rather than fighting to, you know, change that paradigm. It's sort of absurd to me. Like a lot of art and a lot of artists, the only way they can survive is to get some sort of corporate job, doing something that they don't really care about, so it's at least tangential to
Yeah.
to their passion. I have there's this book of fables I've been trying to put together for a long time. My grandfather back in the 60s and 70s was a professor. He wrote a bunch of Russian style fables. He was a Russian history professor. They're dark and they're weird, and I've always thought that they should be published in some way, but I thought it would be really special to get them to get them illustrated. And I have this really cool illustrator friend. I had reached out to a few people. He bit, and he was going to do it, and we raised some money to do a couple sample ones, and then we were going to try to get a publisher and stuff like that. But he had a couple of kids, and artists have to make money in their regular life too, and we weren't paying his what he usually demands. And so it took like 6 years to get the first two of these. And then I was so exhausted by the whole process. I've had similar processes with trying to like work with musicians who have to, feed themselves as well. That whole 6 years went into getting 2 illustrations towards this thing done. And then in the last 2 weeks, I've put together, the other 16 illustrations we want to do, and I'm putting together a version to bring to publishers. And sure, 14 of them are AI generated, and there's a note there that says this is a sample template. I'd love to use artists, but using an artist to create even create or develop a concept can make something take 100 times longer and be 100 times more expensive and keep things from ever even happening. Like sometimes it takes the ability to just put an idea together to a degree where you can even open it up to be worked on by an artist. And if we're fighting against the possibility of something like ChatGPT, and for me to do what I'm doing now, it doesn't mean that my project will be reserved for artists. It means it just won't happen.
Right. Yeah, just imagining how many examples are there out there of stuff that isn't happening. Like one way I like to define basic income even is just, instead of talking about it as like its actual definition, is just getting to people to think, what is it that you're not doing in life because you don't have this unconditional income floor? Like that's really basic income. It is whatever that leads to, like that kind of, that North Star kind of driving force, this thing that you really want to accomplish. Like the lack of basic income is preventing that from happening in so many ways and so many people.
And the combination of tech and basic income is what's really powerful. Because in a world where we have everyone's basic sustenance is okay, and we have the technology to do these things, not only can I spin up the project idea, but also when I want my friend Alex to come and illustrate it, he can think more about how he loves the project and less about how he's got to make sure he's got his job lined up and he can't take any time off work, or he can't do whatever to actually work on it with me. It's on both sides. It allows for the art to happen, both from me as generating the concept and the artist as the one working on it. UBI just sort of opens or removes a lot of those obstacles.
It also has, imagine what it would be like if every 18-year-old knew, well, when he was 14 or she was 11, that when they were 18, they would be getting this money for the rest of their lives. That would, speaking about developing your, what you're really passionate about, that would give him the room to do that. They could say to Daddy, no, I don't want to be a doctor.
Well, then we'll give their parents the ability to know that as well. And so every conversation from like 7th grade on isn't about like how you're going to be a doctor and protect your retirement. It's like you can actually focus on living today when you're a kid,
When Gerald was going to Harvard, when he went to college, we used to talk to him on a weekly basis. We'd have a talk. And at one point, my late husband asked him, your major is history of science? How is that going to get you a job? And Joel said, Dad, Harvard is not a trade school. And this is the concept that you're talking about in terms of freeing people to pursue what they care about most without paying a price for it.
Yeah, it reminds me of, I don't remember what year this was. Maybe you know this, Gisele. But it was like the year that that the average in general shifted from the reasoning behind what people pursue in college, like went from wanting to say learn and study that subject and shifted towards earn money, doing that. And I think it was like 2008, 2009, somewhere around there. Do you happen to know
I
that
did
year?
not, but
But
I would think it was earlier than that.
yeah, you would think so. But it really is kind of more of a recent thing as far as the majority of people going to college purely as like a means of, career wise based on money. Um, even, you know, even when I went to college, and when I studied psychology, I definitely didn't do that for the money aspect. I was just fascinated by learning about just the way that the mind works, the way that we think and behave as people, our motivations. Like it was all very fascinating to me, and that's just when I kind of imagined it as I thought of it as like wanting to kind of upload this knowledge base into my mind because it was something that seemed like it would be very useful throughout the rest of my life to have that in my mind. And I was very fortunate that I was able to do that because I've been very happy with having studied that, even though, I'm not any psychologist or anything like that. And yeah, I would love for more people to be able to go back to that
Yeah, but Scott,
and just really able to study what they want.
Scott, you're Scott, right? So the society keeps on harping on the fact that a college degree makes you wealthier. That is the big thing. You're going to make more money if you go to college. That's the time. And nobody says you're going to be, a better person for going to college or you're going to have a happier life for going to college. They say you'll make more money if you go to college. That's what they say. That's
Yeah, that's the newer thing. It certainly wasn't that way for me. Growing up, it wasn't like, what are you going to do for money? It was, what do you want to be? What do you find interesting? And yeah, we definitely lost that as
Yeah, but
far
it's
as
also shifted from, I mean, you were part of, in history, 15% of the society has to be educated. The rest, it's not necessary. And up until the last century, you know, that was the way it was. A lot of people didn't go to college and had a perfectly wonderful lives. When you think about the
Mhm.
prosperity and the level of happiness, and I'm using air quotes here, that we had in the 50s, during and I'm not talking about, marginalized groups. I'm talking about the general population. We were, people were much happier than they are now. And you didn't have these addiction problems or the suicide rate. I mean, it's just the wealthier we get, the more uh, our lives are made easier because we don't have to, scrub laundry on a board anymore. The more that happens, the unhappier we become. It's so completely counterintuitive. It's because we haven't
Well, there
been
was a hot
able to manage it properly.
there was a hot second for my generation or that was my generation was in where we the messaging was you can do whatever you want, like we've come far enough as a society that you can pursue your dreams and do whatever matters to you. And then we sort of started drifting away from that back more towards the what is often an immigrant mentality, which is like we need to get a foothold here, we need to at least have our security, and then maybe your kids or their kids will be able to do what they want. But we're kind of drifting backwards. And this thing we were talking about before about parents, I think that's a really strong thing that needs to be addressed more. Is just when someone someone can willingly sign up for their own sort of um, want and poverty and pursuit of an ambition and a dream, but the second you have children, you have an obligation, and people's ideals are always trumped by the responsibility to make sure that your kid doesn't go hungry. And in a society where we don't guarantee that your kid doesn't go hungry, then we are forcing people to disengage from their social obligation to focus on their familial obligation, their parental obligation. If we created a thing that, parental basic income wasn't needed, but, every single person and kid was covered, then the people who are parents don't have to only think about how do I just make sure my kids are safe. And then our conversations with our parents, our entire time growing up, can be more about things like, what do you care about? What do you want to do? Rather than these just completely demoralizing, dehumanizing, like, that's so cute that you care about that, but you have to get real and you have to figure out something that's going to make you money, because we don't want to or know that we'll have the ability to take care of you forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting to consider this. That kind of like framing of how we've kind of retreated into familiar relationships away from societal relationships, community relationships. It's funny, like watching this watching today's movies. Like a real trope that you see is especially like in the Fast and Furious movies. It's like, we're family. It's kind of like joke that's like in everything. And like you see that a lot as being like, you really, we're family. And I think that, yeah, when it comes to the potential of basic income and why it would be transformative, being able to see the entire country, as your family, and I think that used to be, I think, the way that we saw, like, there was great pride in being an American, and you looked at everyone as being fellow Americans, and we're all in this together kind of thing. And yeah, there does seem to have been this retreat into, like, I got to worry about mine, and really
And
just
focusing
thinking,
on the villains, like, we have to, all these evils in the world we have to protect against, and a lot of these evils are other people. And the longer we stick to these, us versus them mentalities, rather than an expansive, like, here's how we can be better together, we're still driving to the edge of that cliff. It's terrifying to see. It's fun, that it's nice to be able to have something to work on, but for most people who aren't in a position where they have a project or something they can lean into, like we're talking about building a movement before. If you're just a person trying to get by, and you can hear the idea of basic income and be like, oh, well, that sounds interesting, but like, what the hell am I supposed to do about that? It's just the way I feel about most things. UBI was different to me, because when it came along, not only did it spark my curiosity as an engineer and as a person who cares, and like as something that sounds like and is mathematically a reasonable solution, but I just so happened to be dating a filmmaker who wanted to do a new film, and then I had this opportunity to work on a project, and I've used that project to completely build my life around. But almost no one has that sort of luxury of having some sort of opportunity come up like that, where they can pursue their passion. Most people have to take care of themselves and take care of their kids, and they have to do it in such a way that someone will pay them money for it. So it's our job as a movement to give people ways to plug in that are not at odds with, protecting themselves and their families.
Well, the hard part is, how do we do that? Well, how do we give people those opportunities? I mean, this is about mind shift and societal recognition of the fact that we're all of us in it together. There was a glimpse of that during the pandemic, but it went away. I mean, all of those essential workers, without whom we would be dead. I mean, literally. If all the people who got the food to the supermarkets, the people who grew the food and put it on the trucks, without them, we would be dead. It was, if they had all disappeared, if they had all gotten sick, we wouldn't have made it. But that spirit, that the recognition of that, which was very strong. You remember everybody clapping in New York when the essential workers were going home. I mean, there was as right after 2001, when 9/11 happened. People, I mean, the feeling of being American was overwhelming. Well, this is what we have to capture, and that's very hard to do.
Well, you know my proposal.
Yeah.
build a platform, let people plug in. I mean, it's important to make it easy either way. And the two things we focused on is, one, just use technology, like embrace technology and its connective power to give people an infrastructure that doesn't dissolve because it's not based on a person or a temporary campaign. And then the docuseries is what we were talking about before. Like, the easiest way for someone to get into an idea is to get invested in a story, get people invested in real human stories and connecting, lean into people's deep desire to be socially connected to other people, and do it in a big way. That's the kind of thing I like when people reach out to me. Should I do a documentary or do a pilot or whatever? It's like, well, what is your vision for how you're going to achieve something for whoever the audience is that sort of elevates them, gives them a potential to do something with it. And if you don't have an answer to that, then you should be looking for something to support rather than something to do.
The other
I'm sorry, before we continue on, I just want to remind all the listeners that we are in the second hour. So please, if you have a question for Gisele, you have a comment along the lines of what we're talking about, then please request to speak. We'd love to hear from you. And we actually have a speaker, our first speaker already, Ms. Brooke. Do you have a question or a comment about what we're talking about?
Make sure to hit unmute.
Is she muted? We don't hear you yet, Ms. Brooke. Look, can you hear us?
Oh man, she had some technical difficulty last week too.
Okay. All right. Well,
just chime in whenever when
you got it working.
And get your microphone working.
Let me add something here. There's another aspect that we have to belabor, and that is the idea that, as I was speaking about essential workers, which first of all confirms the value of everybody, right? It doesn't. If you're if you're getting food together for other people, you're contributing something incredibly important. I mean, literally the survival of other people. In the same way, on the economic level and on the level of money, the billionaires and the people who are very wealthy in this society, in our country, would not be able to, would be stuck in their track if people didn't work for them or if people couldn't consume what they were producing. And nobody really gets their head around that. The fact that everything depends on the connections between us, all of it, our survival, the way we live our lives, the way we connect with each other. It all depends on other people. And we haven't captured that, especially in the United States with the individualism that's at the basis of our philosophical ideas.
Yeah, it is. We are so incredibly interdependent, and it's it's crazy how, like, even just thinking, like, let's say someone complains about, the cost of a Big Mac, and how it's, $7 or something, and we're not thinking about everything that went into that, like, to make that, you had to grow these crops, and those crops took a while, and a lot of effort in order to do that. And then you had to refine these crops into the ingredient materials, and you had to create everything else, put it all together, and the shipping, the logistics, like all this stuff. And if you think like the big picture, it's kind of crazy that it's just $7 as far as, and then like the scope of what the effort that we put into earning the $7 to do that. Like and that's just like that kind of thing. When I cross like a bridge or something, and just think about all the effort that went into that bridge, I could never have made that bridge.
I like the example of like drop someone in the jungle, or they like take a self-made man or whatever who started a business and did it all by himself and throw him in the jungle in the middle of nowhere. And are they going to become, a CEO, or are they going to do their best to stay alive? It's the interdependence is so pronounced, and our delusion about our independence is so exacerbated that it's like a farce. And it's like, what's a really powerful way to show that? I don't really know yet, except for coming out the other side with a better system where leaning into the philosophy of interdependence, raises everybody up. But short of that, it's really hard to point that out, because people can just focus on the here and now and take things as inevitable, and it takes a while to make someone really see, what they're benefiting from in terms of what we've developed as a society. It's the thing that makes like people who are burn it all down revolutionaries are just terrifying to me. It's just like this assumption that like, well, when we just trash what we've got now, we'll fix it on the other end. It's like you have no cognizance of the like the hundreds of years of development that got us to this imperfect system we have. To throw it all away and assume like something better is going to rise from the ashes is just the epitome of
And it
naive.
also never
What rises from ashes is
never happened. It's never happened historically. I mean, whenever you've had revolutions, the aftermaths in the first place were very destructive.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, hugely destructive. People dying.
yeah,
Like violence, suffering. Like, yeah.
it's because we are a work in progress. There is no ultimate, there's no Eden. I mean, we can't be, we are always on the way to something. That's what a species is. And while we're doing it, we have to understand what makes us work, what makes us survive as a species. And we have lost sight of that because we've gotten completely, hoodwinked by the myths, like we're a meritocracy. Are you kidding me?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We are not a meritocracy. A meritocracy depends on people starting at the same place. And if you think people in this country who are not white start at the same place as people in this country who are, then you live in a fantasy world. So it's these ideas that make the creed under which the American society operates are incorrect. like the other part of this is the fact that people deserve to be very rich, and or the fact that the entire political system has been corrupted by money, so that one man, one vote, or you can vote the bums out, those are complete fantasies. They're not true. And this is part of making universal basic income a national conversation, because it lifts the curtain on some of the very strong myths that we are stuck under.
Yeah, it's almost like does it require busting those myths first in order to get a basic income, or can the seeking of a basic income together actually lead to the busting of those myths? I think the latter is probably the more accurate
Yes.
one.
Because
Angie, thank you for joining us today. Do you have a question or comment?
I do. First of all, I'm so happy to see all these verified accounts on the in this space this morning, and I am definitely a space surfer. I like to go into spaces and see what people are talking about, and I'm just going to request that if this conversation, if you want to share by liking and reposting this conversation, it might get some more people here in our last hour while we're open to asking questions. And I think the more people that hear these true stories and hear these voices of these people, of our host and our co-host and our guest speaker, who have years and years of experience and knowledge on this very important, I think, topic. And that's all. I just want to ask you all if you could, and you could always take it off your timeline. It doesn't have to be permanent, but if you would like and reset the space, maybe we could get some more people hearing these very knowledgeable host, co-host, and speaker. That's all. I've got to get to work now. Thank you, and I will be
Thanks,
listening.
Angie.
Thank
I
you,
do know
Angie.
how. I do know how to multitask, although they say that that's impossible, that you really just do one thing at a time. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Has everyone completed the assignment?
Looks like Jamal, you're next. Do you have a question or comment for Gisele Russ?
Yes. Thank everyone here for allowing me to speak, and also for everyone's work they're doing in the UBI space. My question is, if we are trying to get UBI established, either at a local level or more at the national level, how do we prevent people such as property owners increasing the rent on individuals that receive the UBI, so that it just basically becomes inevitable?
I don't know if I understood that correctly. It's kind of kind of smudgy audio. Conrad, did you happen to understand that?
Most of it. I got up to how do we prevent, and then I wasn't quite sure. Jamal, can you say it again? Maybe.
Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, just speak loud and clear.
Yeah, my question is, if UBI is established, how do you prevent people from increasing the prices and the rent of certain things?
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So this is a very common question of, if we do universal basic income, won't prices increase to potentially nullify it, or especially rent, won't all of this just go to landlords? So yeah, it's a very frequently asked question. We can just kind of get into that a little bit, I would first of all I'd recommend check out my FAQ and written an article about this before in response. But just in general, so very simplified. First of all, when it comes to basic income, it's universal, but also that doesn't mean that everyone's income after taxes increases by that amount. It can be, entirely revenue neutral, which means that there's no increase in the money supply. And so that's one component. Another component is there is competition, and competition is actually even enhanced by basic income. So, it doesn't make much sense to say if you're a store owner to raise, to double the price of, let's say, the milk in your store when, the store across the street doesn't do that. You're just going to lose your customers. So competition is an important aspect. And when it comes to just prices in general, a lot of this just comes down to supply and demand. So if demand exceeds supply, then you could expect some price increases, at least temporarily, until supply is able to match what that demand is. And yet when it comes to basic income, and this was actually observed in pilots, like the India UBI pilot showed this too, is that supply can actually increase greater than the amount of the demand increase, and prices can actually go down as a result. This is actually, you can see this kind of function in Alaska, where they've had a small annual UBI since 1982. And every year when the dividend checks go out, you actually see businesses having sales. They all drop their prices in order to attract the customers to their own businesses. And since 1982, the CPI growth rate in Alaska actually slowed compared to the rest of the country. And I just want to add one other thing. So when it comes to rent, I would add that we can expect a lot of more home ownership as well, which can push down on rents. And landlords, again, do not know the net increase of someone's income after taxes. So again, a lot of this confusion comes down to just thinking that everybody's income after taxes increases by the amount of the UBI. That is not the case. And it's also not the case that we're just, like, say, printing money with no taxes and leaning into monetary inflation, which also is not necessarily the case either.
I find it helpful to just break it down in simpler terms, like take UBI out of the equation. We already have the issue of we need to make sure that, companies, especially of things that we need, and, landlords and rentierism in general doesn't suck up all our money, because then we don't have any money, right? And no one can get ahead, no one can save, whatever. In general, we need to make sure that there is competition in the marketplace. The places we are worse at doing that are the places that currently suck up all our money, rent and healthcare, and things that I would argue need more regulation to, further prevent that from happening. In a UBI world, it's the same thing. It's just everyone has a little bit more money to suck up. It doesn't change the fact that the way that you keep that money from being extracted through whatever situation of domination there is, like, you absolutely need your healthcare, so you'll pay whatever they say to pay, and you absolutely need a place to stay, and housing is limited and it's all gobbled up by real estate speculation. So you kind of are at the whim of the housing market there. In both cases, making more houses and regulating, regulating speculation and having rent control, things like that, and having, universal health care, having systems in place that ensure that all of our markets work in such a way where people aren't forced through necessity to overpay for something, is the way to do it. And that's true with UBI or without UBI.
Yeah, I think this is it's something that you hear a lot. Just listening to people asking questions it's sort of this idea that, like, if we don't have this bottomless pit that people can fall into when they have zero money. Will that just throw the entire every market force that currently is at work, just completely erase those? Like if we have a basic income, all other market forces that we're used to are just going to disappear all of a sudden, But it's a weird thought, really. It's like just because UBI is proposing people should not start at zero, that it doesn't mean every other thing that currently is active in the economy will suddenly disappear. It's not that radical. It is a radical idea, but it's not going to radically change everything instantly.
Yeah, I feel more recently, this is a post-pandemic phenomenon, is it feels like there's kind of a learned helplessness that's happened as a result of the higher prices that we've seen, where I see this a lot more from the left, actually, in response, where there's this kind of like complete helplessness of, well, there's no point in giving people money for anything, basic income, higher minimum wages, even like union negotiated higher salaries. Like, there's no point in any of that, because
it's
the
all
owners
just
of
going to
companies,
evaporate anyway.
right? They're just going to raise prices just like they did, and there's no point. So like, let's just have only government services and goods. So let's just like not have money anymore. Like, it's really, really weird. Just see, like,
It's
that was
deep
the
rooted.
response.
Like, you're just used to, like, they're going to figure out some way to screw us. Right? This great idea is eventually going to turn into something that's going to screw us over. So why even bother?
But whatever happened to excess profit taxes? We used to have those.
Yeah.
So just bring them back.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we went through a very specific situation with this pandemic, like a once in a century kind of situation. And corporations used their ability to use inflation that was a result of supply, falling beneath demand, thanks to just these massive global supply issues. And they just took advantage of it for excess profit. And yeah, from the beginning, we should have even recognized that and said, there's a good chance that this could happen. This certainly happens quite often. This is we see this in wars, and we see this after disasters. Pandemic should have been seen as a disaster in that respect too, and just say, hey, let's get ahead of this and discourage corporate excess profit seeking by just making sure that, hey, we'll just look at your average for the past few years, and if your profit margin was, say, 15% as an average, then okay, well, then we'll just tax anything above 15% at this higher rate, much higher rate, in order so that they, oh, well, let's not do that. Like, there are things that we can do to make sure to discourage corporations from doing this, to enforce antitrust laws, to incentivize more competition, create and encourage more competition, not get rid of these tariffs that it makes things unnecessarily expensive. And there's lots we can do. But yeah, we didn't do these things, but it doesn't mean that we should toss out the idea of a market system altogether and just go for like centralization of government goods and services. It just means that we got to do this better.
It's funny. I think the radicalness of the idea of UBI leads a lot of people to assume it's like it's meant as like a utopian panacea sort of a policy where it's like, okay, so if you have UBI, won't all these other things happen? And all these other things are assuming we just like turn off all other regulations and all other programs and all. No one ever, like, when you're proposing like building a higher speed rail system or something like that, and say, well, what if landlords then go and capture all of our rent all of a sudden? It's like, why would those be related? They're not related. You're somehow working into the assumption that we're going to have a basic income, that we stop doing all of these other things to make sure that our market works more fairly. And it's just sort of a non sequitur.
Yeah. I'm I've got some questions for Gisele too. Sorry to cut in front of some of the people that have been requesting to speak here, but I mean, people should know that Gisele's a pretty amazing person, and there's a book that she's got about her called, I'll plug it, it's called Force of Nature, the remarkable true story of one Holocaust survivor's resilience, tenacity, and purpose, which is a good read. But Gisele, I don't know you as well as these guys do, and but it's very clear that you've been through some really difficult times. You've persevered through a lot. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, how do you think things would have been different for you if UBI just existed forever? Like there's no point in history at which UBI was not something that would have helped people. I'm just curious, like, if you're looking back on, a particular time, like, how would that have affected you?
Well, thank you for your kind words. It wouldn't have affected me in my early life when the Nazis invaded France, because that was a completely different. There was no way that would have given us a better. Although if basic income per se would not have been enough for my mother and I to go to the United States at the right moment, like before the invasion or before that would not But when we came to America with $400 in 1947, which was not a lot of money then, and it would have made a difference mostly to my mother because I was a child. She remarried not because of love per se, although it wasn't not love, but she remarried for security, for financial security for me, so that I could, and that affected her life a lot. It wasn't a happy marriage. So had she had a job and had she had basic income, it would have perhaps taken her in a different direction.
So your upbringing itself would have been different.
Yes, well, possibly. I mean, This didn't affect me, although it did affect me in the fact that I had my stepfather, who was a wonderful man, had a younger child who was 8 years younger than me, and who demanded my mother's complete attention, and that was a very difficult thing for me, psychologically, because we've been joined at the hip, my mother and I. We survived together, and I was only 11 when I came here, but I was about 100 years old, having lived through the whole Holocaust thing. For me, so this is why all my life I'm what you call a self-made woman. I was a libertarian until Gerald began to work on me and began to show me that boosting yourself up by picking yourself up by your bootstraps was really not a thing. If you think about, in fact, it was used, he didn't say that, but I've since learned that it was used when it was first coined to show how impossible the thing was. Because if you think about literally pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, it's impossible. It's like jumping 10 feet in the air. It's not doable.
It was a way to mock somebody and say, "Oh, why don't you pull yourself up by your bootstraps?"
It was a way. It was not meant to be a life dream. What to me the most persuasive thing for an individual in the real world about universal basic income is what I mentioned before about a young person, a person who begins to understand the world when they're around 11 or so, and when they realize that they will get this amount of money when they turn 18, because the children are our future, right? Well, what kind
I
of
believe.
image of the world do they have right now? It's not an image of freedom and independence. It's an image of having to do what is expected and forgetting about what you really love, and there's no independence built into the system we have now. And by knowing that in the future you are going to be, so you're going to have access to this amount of money for as long as you live, with no stigma, with everybody's getting it. This is what will unleash the potential of the humanity.
Amen.
100%.
Yeah.
Ms. Brooke, can we hear you now? Is mic
I
working?
think so. That's why I was
Oh,
testing it
she's
out.
in. Okay.
Did you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, this works.
Oh, good. I'm sorry to interrupt. I was like testing it out. I was ready to start. Anyway. Hi, Scott. It's so nice to see you and talk to you.
Hi.
And everybody.
Yeah.
UBI guy. And okay, so there. I don't know what to say now that I'm finally, I was so frustrated that I couldn't get on the microphone. I was like, what is wrong with the technology? Okay. I feel like the one thing I wanted to point out, that I know I'm preaching to the choir, but it's just really obvious to me that like we have this negative assumption about people's human nature. Like it's always going into it like people are lazy, people don't want to work. It's like we have to get out of that mentality and just allow for like the evidence to speak for itself, and just because for whatever reason we have a negative bias. I guess that's psychology. Like you would know, Scott, you said you studied psychology, but like when we see the evidence, we have to allow for the evidence. And there's also the fact that there's natural misfortune that happens to everybody, and there's man-made inequality. And we should be delighted that we can create solutions to our problems that we create. Like there's bad weather, and then there's climate change. So we shouldn't be like shirking responsibilities and just being like, it's your fault if the rain falls on your head. Like, no, I mean, we create umbrellas or we stay out of the wet. And then when we are responsible for like misfortune and the massive inequality, wealth inequality that is really harmful and can be prevented, then we should take responsibility and step up. And like UBI is such a practical, like hands-on, just tangible, very simple solution to a man-made problem. Like, because we'll always have there'll always be inequality naturally, right? Like there's light and dark. So there'll always be like certain levels of, it won't always be fair across the board. That would be boring. But just to bring about raise the floor, I think is necessary. And I'm just speaking as someone who's being evicted as we speak. Like I'm coming at it from a very much like, this would make an impact on my life in real time. And it's like, and I can see that I'm not a lazy or uneducated or, deserving of less than somebody else person. Like I know myself, like I like to work, and it's like, wages haven't raised in 20 years or whatever, more than 20 years. So it's just like those types of mismatches of like cognitive dissonance are frustrating. It's hard to express sometimes, but anyway.
Yeah, I was hoping that there would be more people that experienced some real distress for the first time during the pandemic, where they would have come out of it and thought, you know what, like, yeah, this system that is supposed to be here for me wasn't when I needed it, and we should do something.
We got a taste
different.
of it, just a little taste with the unemployment. I think they sent us unemployment checks or whatever. They gave us a little short term. And I had a friend who posted on Facebook. He said, at first I didn't agree with you about UBI and Andrew Yang, but once I got that unemployment check, I realized that it is a benefit and it's not something that makes me a different person. It makes me lazy and entitled. He was like, he changed his mind about UBI based on that short experiment. And it's like, then the government withdrew it, which is why I'm grateful to you guys too for doing Comingle. Is that what it's called? Comingle. Just saying, we can do it ourselves. Like we don't have to wait for the government to do something. We can generate our solutions. Like we should be excited about that. So, and I'm excited about it. I appreciate what you guys are doing.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
With the human nature question, I've switched to not talking about laziness or working or anything like that, and focusing instead on the thing I see as the universal human truth is that every single person wants to matter. We want our time on this earth to matter, and so giving people power, in this instance, in the form of cash, unconditional, is empowering people to figure out and pursue what they feel is their way of mattering. And so if you get someone to acknowledge that simple idea that whoever someone is, whether you think they're lazy or not, or have any qualms about any part of their personality, you should be able to acknowledge that everybody wants to matter. And then it makes it a lot harder to kind of like delude yourself with this idea that people given money are just going to completely check out.
Yeah.
Are going to want to, stare at the wall and play video games, because nobody wants to feel like their time on this earth is pointless. That's just the truth.
Yeah, and then you can see the you
Yeah,
and them. You don't have an us and them mentality. Us and them separates them, the lazy people, from us, the creative people. And it's all of us want to matter. All of us want to be safe, healthy, and happy. And if we're playing video games all the time, we're self-medicating. We're trying to escape from reality. So if we can engage with reality in a way that expresses ourselves and shows us we matter, we don't have to self-medicate, I believe. So we're all us. We're not. It's no us and them that we can kill with war and poverty and all those things, in my opinion. But thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been thinking about that kind of all the time. But it's the same thing that you get like with relationships. Like you should never you should not use the words always or never when you're trying to describe somebody. And I feel like we're using that same kind of fallacy when we're talking about people in general. Like that people can always be lazy. Like if you were a lazy person, if you're sitting down right now, you are lazy, and therefore you don't deserve anything, right? So you're like making these calculations based on these kind of blanket one-time generalizations, and so I feel like a picture of humanity as this like flowing organism that moves from being lazy to active, being motivated to by money and motivated intrinsically, like that we're all like a product of all these forces at work here, and like we need to kind of get over that like the label of based on sort of these one-time observations. Anyway, that's me.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Ms. Brooke, for joining us and adding your thoughts. And I hope that you're able to get through this most recent challenge in your life with the eviction.
Yeah.
Zachary, thank you for joining us. Do you have a question for Gisele, or just a comment on what we've been talking about?
Yeah, I have a question for Gisele. I've been in and out a little bit, but I'm curious to hear a little bit more about governance, and it's just encouraging to hear from like other organizations like Forward Party, for instance, where it's like they're really taking on UBI, and I'm curious if like ranked choice voting, or like what are some ways that you see reform with governance, Gisele?
So obviously, getting a political or an economic solution like universal basic income implemented depends on the political, universe. Independently, I mean, those are two separate things that are very intertwined at the higher levels. But for sure, our political system is no longer viable. As I mentioned before, I mean, gerrymandering, the electoral college, those things are not, they do not fit in with the world in the 21st century. And they're almost impossible to change. But there's no question that it would be much easier to implement UBI if the same mentality, the same idea that underlies both those spheres, the economic sphere and the political sphere, that everyone counts, that everyone contributes, that everyone deserves, and I don't like to use that word because it's loaded, but it's true, then of course things would move faster. I applaud what Andrew is doing with ranked choice voting, and because I think that's definitely political steps in the right direction. But we can't. So whether you specialize, whether you you concentrate on something like UBI, and it's as I am, and it's part of, this is a mission in life, or you are very involved in trying to get political reform to occur. I mean, that's not an or. That's a possible, you can do both. And I try to do both in a very small way, but these are not exclusive. In fact, they're dependent on each other.
I'd also add that that there's definitely things that we can utilize the existing system for in a different way that has been shown to work with previous other movements. And I think like a good example is, as state by state implementation of UBI. And everyone should know that, first of all, Alaska has had their annual dividend UBI since 1982, and Oregon is currently working on gathering signatures for a signature initiative that would provide a dividend of $750 per year to everyone there in Oregon. That would be the result of higher taxes on larger corporations there. And I think that also kind of answers the question of this this kind of vehicle for helping mobilize people. Like it helps to be able to direct someone to say, oh well, in your state, they're gathering signatures for this, so that's something that you can do to help is to actually be a part of that. And so there's just one state right now looking to be the next state to follow Alaska, but there can be a lot more states that do that. There's dozens of states with that potential for signature initiatives, and it's just a matter of getting that to actually happen in those states.
Yeah, it requires people stepping up and and that's what the what Income Movement, which is the organization on whose board I serve, and that the Fund for Humanity funds. It's trying to do that at very much at the grassroots level, but it's not. It has found people who collaborate at the guaranteed basic incomes in the guaranteed income space, where the people who are working on pilots and those kinds of evidence-based activities are part of the movement there, but we need the next step. We need exactly what you were just saying. We need somebody in a state where initiatives are allowed to, like Ohio, to form a group of people and mobilize people to go and stand in front of Costco on a Saturday morning and collect signatures. When I ran for Congress in 1998 in Marin County, I had volunteers who helped me, and I did it myself, gather the signatures to get on the ballot. I didn't pay anybody to do that. And I got on the ballot. So but someone has to start that. Or some group of people have to get together and decide that this is what they're going to do wherever their initiative processes are available in
Am I on? No.
Yeah, no. Gisele, do you want to finish?
I'm just thinking about what happened in Ohio with abortion.
Yeah. Yeah. So BJ Chippendale, thanks for joining us. Do you have a question for Gisele?
Well, actually, I was just trying to make the comment that the UBI is essential to any solution to the inequality problem that we have in our socioeconomic systems. But the problem that we actually have is way deeper than just the UBI.
Mm-hmm.
We need the UBI. It's the only solution that can actually help us cooperate instead of compete.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot more to making it work than just that. And I went through this with my own work, with my own book, and it took me 10 years to figure out how to have competition, have a UBI, have profits, and just have all of that work together to make a system that functions without losing our individuality and without losing our motivation to do the great things that we do. So now I'm looking at this and saying to myself, okay, we need the UBI, and everybody so far I've agreed. Most of you have all provided me with information that is already in my book. I figured it out, but I did it from the laws of physics. I came at this from an entirely different angle, and I got the same answers, which ought to make you very comfortable with your answers. You're doing very well. But we've been doing the wrong thing with money for 5,000 years, and fixing it is not going to be easy. That's all I've got, really.
This is it. You're so right, and this is why Gerald called it a transitional solution. It was, if you read his book, Crisis 2038, he doesn't offer it as the final answer. It's the way to transition us from the kind of economic system we have now to whatever new economic system. And, Edward Bellamy in 1890 something wrote a book called Looking Backward, the year 2000. And he created a utopia that, was based on collaboration and on everybody doing the right thing in the different phases of their lives. It's worth reading that book. It's a small book. It's not even an airplane ride. But it is really, so this is what you're actually saying. You're saying UBI is just one step in the process of completely revising our economic system and the meaning of money and all of the things that we are steeped into.
Yeah, that's what really drew me in too at the very beginning, is just thinking about the bigger question of what comes like next, big picture wise. And it just seemed like UBI was this kind of lever to like actually enable that like much bigger thing. And yeah, I would love for more people to think about this from a bigger picture kind of thing as to just what UBI can actually enable, instead of just being the end goal.
It's sort of just like I think every person's primary objective is to want to matter, and UBI helps make that happen. I feel like societally, it's sort of indicative of a stretch for like humanity, or it's a next step in humanity's continuing effort to find higher purpose, right? It's like at a certain point, if we're not growing societally, if we're not becoming a better species if we're not becoming more conscientious, more powerful, more whatever it is. There's I guess an inherent nature, both at the individual level and societal level, to want more. And more doesn't have to mean more resources being consumed, but it does have to mean we're not just kind of spinning our wheels in the same state of being, accepting, gross unfairness or inequality or whatever that, and being okay with it. Otherwise, what are we doing here as a species? Like, what is our purpose as a creature on a planet somewhere, if we're not growing?
Yeah, we're at 2:00, and I just want to get in one last question from Left Lane Lois. She's been waiting for a bit. Left Lane Lois, do you have a question for Gisele here at the end?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. Well, one of the things that I think is we have really backward priorities with our money. Right now, I think it's at 63% of our GDP is going for military, and a lot of the military could use an overhaul and slimming down, especially in the drone era. But I went on a trek, I guess you call it. I spent the last 3 years living in a van traveling around the United States. And some of the places that I have been through are either really, really beautiful, or they are just garbage houses that people have to live in. Just right outside of Washington, D.C. I was shocked at some of the neighborhoods and the just deterioration of living, people having to live in these homes because there isn't anything else. And when I went down and through the South, most of those little tiny towns, their median income is less than $1,000. And I was always thinking, if this little town had, I guess the poorest town in America is Alligator, Mississippi. And if they had a UBI, even $700-800 a month, it would transform these little towns. It would transform our whole country, because that money doesn't just go in some bank somewhere. It goes into the community. It builds stores. It builds schools. All of that. It would be just kind of like a big round circle that keeps going on eternally. And one of the things too is, we're so scared of the big corporations and everything. In 1934, I believe it was, FDR was having to deal with the Great Depression. And he was like, what am I going to do? And so he called together a bunch of corporations and told them they're either going to raise their taxes or we're going to confiscate your business. And they started paying. So the money's there. We just need to prioritize how we use it, and letting people, letting these corporations off the hook for basically they're just sucking out of our paychecks, So anyway, I don't know if I have any question. How can we get it going? Well, how are we going to get it going is we get some laws passed, or we get a group of people like that one lady was talking about. Somebody has to start, and some state And I think Oregon is really on a good path to getting something going. So anyway, that's enough.
No. Well, thank you. And yeah, I agree. I think that UBI would be just massive for rural America, for small town USA. You know, these towns that have been gutted by, you know, the transformation of the manufacturing sector, the introduction of places like Walmart and Amazon that ate a lot of these small businesses. Like, this would do a huge thing to reverse that. And I hope that that rural voters and who are overwhelmingly conservative start to see basic income that way, as being something that could absolutely rejuvenate their communities.
You
So,
know,
yeah,
one
thank
thing
you
I was
for
down there
bringing that up.
in St. Charles, down on the bayou there. They had two hurricanes come in within 6 months of each
It was
other.
obliterated twice.
Even today, this is 10 years after all of that. There's roofs all over town. On the one side of the bridge are blue tarps still today. They can't afford to even put a roof on their house. You know, come on, America. What the heck? We're not taking care of our people at all. You know, we're just letting them flounder out there. Anyway.
There is something to driving around this country and seeing all of the different places and ways people live. Where, you know, our media and our internet are encourage us to stay in our bubbles, but it is dramatic, the different, the vast diversity of income and life experience in this one country.
Yeah, when he said gutted,
we are here.
When you said gutted, that's exactly what half of the country is gutted little towns that are dying, and they're everywhere.
Yep. All right. Well, we are here at the end, and Gisele, thank you for joining us today. And would you like to leave listeners with a final thought or call to action, or, you know, anything you would like to say?
Well, tell your friends. You know, I mean, after Ms. Brooks said something about getting people onto the podcast, people came onto the podcast. So it works. And it takes time. And if you're willing to devote the time, then join us.
All right. Thank you, Gisele,
My
again.
pleasure, truly.
And thank you all, listeners, for listening and being here with us today. And reminder, we do this every Wednesday, so we will see you hopefully next week as well. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Bye.
Bye now.
Bye.